Hi, I'm Chaplain Eric Doolittle. Welcome to Faith and Conversations about life, belief, and everything. Today, we welcome Dr. Anita Thomas for life, faith, and leadership. Last July, Dr. Anita Thomas assumed her role as the 11th president of North Central College after the unanimous election by the Board of Trustees. Since then, she's become a very familiar face on our campus as she gives time to show up and to meet our students, our faculty, and staff as they are part of the life of this campus. She's also very busy on her Instagram channel, which seems to take up a lot of time, so very impressive. Dr. Thomas has an impressive academic resume and a leadership resume that includes leadership at St. Catherine's University, a Roman Catholic university for women in St. Paul, Minnesota, the University of Indianapolis, a United Methodist institution of higher education in Indiana, Loyola University in Chicago, also a Roman Catholic institution, and degree work at Loyola and Northwestern University, Catholic, as we mentioned, and formerly Methodist institutions. So we're so glad to have you here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks. I was just bragging a minute ago to say that really people have started to recognize that I did this whole thing so I could just sit down and talk to people I like to talk to, and we get to do a lot of that.
Yes.
So hopefully we're going to explore some things maybe we've covered before and some new stuff. But I want to start with you.
Okay.
And as we're thinking about faith and leadership, how has your faith background and your faith identity led you in your work in higher education?
It's a great question to start with. And a really interesting question for me because I don't necessarily resonate or connect to leadership. As a human, and I'll come back and say more about that in a second, but faith is the central to everything for me. And so the leadership part of that is somewhat tangential, but integrated in a strange sort of way. So I will say, sitting in one of those chairs, I'm feeling like the Black Baptist preacher part is about to come out again. I grew up in the South in Kentucky and grew up in a very strong Christian household where church participation meant you slept in your house because you were at church all day, weekends, Bible study Wednesday, choir rehearsal, youth, Baptist training union. So our house was the place where people gathered, but we lived in the church. And to say that, really, the church was so integral to my development, my sense of personality, my connection to others, and my connection to the world. So when I think about that sense of faith and how embedded it is in me, it really came from being raised and socialized and spending all of my time in the church. So much so that I think like the values are just a part of who I am and how I see the world. I was also, thanks for going through the introduction, trained, educated at Loyola, and then had the wonderful opportunity to be part of the faculty and administration at Loyola before I left. And it was the big joke at St. Catherine's about how Jesuit I am. That sense of faith and the connection to me is another one of those implicit background parts of how I see myself and how I relate to the world. When I was at St. Kate's, the Sisters of St. Joseph, who were endearing women, business women, very oriented to social justice and to empowering young women, they would often say, we'd be in a meeting around something and they would go, "Oh, okay, Anita," and they would turn to explain a Catholic tenet to me and they would go, "Oh, wait, she's Jesuit, she knows this." And then at other times they would be like, "Oh my gosh, you are so Jesuit." And I'd go, what did I say? Can you pull it out? Because you all recognize it and I don't. So for me, it really is that sense of connection, the sense of love, the sense of the importance of human dignity and the worth of all individuals that's just embedded. The Catholic Jesuit part is all around the Catholic social teachings, which starts with the importance of the worth of human dignity and then takes you through contextual issues, poverty and homelessness and the power of education. So that sense of faith really is just how I see and identify myself. but not in a way where it necessarily is the first thing I will tell people, although I joke a lot about being a Black Baptist preacher. It just is the way that I view the world and I see the world. There's an easier thread for me in terms of thinking about faith and education. So I grew up in the church. My family were educators at a variety of levels. My mom was an educator, her sisters. Actually went to kindergarten when my mom taught fifth grade. That was a torturous time. It was either the church or the school or in between for us. That sense of the importance of and the power of education was really critically instrumental in how I see myself. We grew up in a household. My sister and I always tell the same stories whenever we're speaking about the random people who just came in our house to stay for a period or a spell. This is Aunt so-and-so, or this is your new play cousin so-and-so, and we would just take in, foster individuals, but really for the purpose of helping them to stay in school, to really think about education, to provide a bridge for a kid who might need an extra space, an additional hand to be able to finish. Same thing in the church. Baptist Training Union, every Thursday evening. It just was all about being educated, the importance of education, tutoring, helping to empower, fostering resilience. There's a lot of opportunity for public speaking as part of BTU. I think I started giving speeches in church when I was 10. And so people are always, you're so comfortable talking. It's like, yeah, you had to be. But that sense of education and the connection to faith really is how I would define myself at the core. It's about empowering others. It's about respecting the worth and dignity of others. It's just an important part of that loving and being Christ-like in the world, and then extending that to help to empower people to complete education at all levels. I'm just as obsessed with PK-12 all the way up to post-secondary education and really thinking about empowering. Then you get to how does that tie to leadership? Well, that's the part that's the more challenging in terms of I see myself in being really grounded in my sense of spirituality and religion. That extends to what I would say is my vocation, that emphasis around education and empowering others through education. Leading that, well, that's an accidental happenstance. I went to a leadership institute, and one of the facilitators talked to us about we had done a 30-second elevator speech about who we were and how we were leading and what that meant. And, it was it was my turn and then I became department chair, or it was whatever, or people said you'd be good at this and do it. And she said, you have to stop with the accidental leader and be an intentional leader. And I said, yeah, that's interesting, because that's how I respond to things that seem challenging. But it really did send me on that. Are you a leader? Do you see yourself as a leader? You've done a lot around spiritual gifts. Is leadership a part of that? And can you integrate that in terms of how you see yourself, in terms of the importance of education, and the importance of the values, and getting down to the importance of the worth of all and dignity of all humans? So the faith and leadership connection to me is less integral, with the exception of the importance of education empowering others and serving as a leader to help institutions to be able to foster that on a large scale. Okay, long answer.
Yeah, and such great stuff. I would be remiss if I didn't lift up my connection, of course, with working at Georgetown before I came, another Jesuit institution. And honestly, how much John Wesley, who is part of the, the founder of the Methodist tradition, I will say borrowed heavily from Ignatius of Loyola with some of those ideas of holistic care, dignity for the whole person, and then how do you build institutions that can help people find those out. And so that's why you see so many, if you go into a place and it's like, oh, how did this college get started? It's like, well, odds, Catholic, high probability, especially within the Jesuit folks, Methodists right in there with them. American Baptists have a lot of great schools too. And so you see where that overlap was. And part of that was training leaders often educators or faith leaders, to then go out and do the work to change people's lives in the world. And so I think that that's a great parallel for us to understand as people are trying to, as we're kind of recapturing that idea of what does it mean as a United Methodist institution, that we see these other places where it's baked in so intentionally and so well because of those deep values, those deep roots about who we want, how we see people, and what we want to do to help them succeed.
Absolutely.
And I think the other piece in that is the idea of what does leadership look like. And it's so different in education and in faith traditions than it can be in business spaces. Although I think they're starting to learn some, which is it's always, who are we?
Yes.
What do we have?
Yes.
And it's much more an empowerment model and kind of a how do we get people to go in a certain direction. There was a quote, I think it's up above in the coffee lab, that says, most people don't start out to change the world, they just start out to help some people. And I think that's a really fascinating spot for us to think of as leadership kind of accumulates sometimes, is because they're like, well, I'm just trying to help some people. Oh, and I can help more people if I enter into this space. And I can expand that reach even more. And all of a sudden, you're a leader when maybe you just wanted to help some people.
I'm laughing at that one. My background is in psychology, my doctorate, and so and in counseling psychology, which does have much more of that prevention, mental health, and well-being, as opposed to mental illness and disease. There's much more of an emphasis on diversity and understanding the role of context, not as much as social work, but a little more towards that continuum. And I really enjoyed working with children and youth. That was just what we did as a family, and so that was the emphasis area I was going to have. I got really frustrated in doing therapy with children because I'd go, I don't think it's you. I think it's the people who keep bringing you. And so really went into family therapy. But I remember at the time doing it's not just the child, it's the child's environment. The parents are the first and primary environment. So now I want to do family therapy, and really retooled and did much around family therapy and couples therapy, but got really frustrated in working with families, mostly African American and Latinx families, and poverty, and really thinking about pressures around oppression and racism and career and the stress and how that related to parenting, which then related to the child outcomes, and really, had this desire to do more. Working with one family at a time isn't enough. I want to dig into systems. Now, ironically, when you're a psychology student, you have a pre-doctoral internship. So for your last graduation requirement, it's a year-long, full-time, paid poorly, but full-time internship experience. And at that time, Loyola was going through portfolios with us because you finish your dissertation, you launch into your career. And I remember having the conversation. We do our oral comprehensive exams and get ready for the dissertation, your internship. And my dissertation chair said, "You seem so much more passionate about communities." And so what is that like? We're trying to figure out getting your portfolios and thinking about your next career. And had you thought about a faculty role? And I had not. It was just, I was going to get a PhD and go start work in a clinic and save babies and move on. It was really then that it was I hadn't thought about being a faculty. I'd had the opportunity to teach classes independently, served as a TA, and then taught independently, and really liked it. But there was something about that framing for me of, I can do more. I can help communities because I can train more people. So if I'm limited with the kids, and now I'm thinking about families, I can train and train the trainer so that we save the community more broadly. And that's, I think, what really, that sense of values of doing more, really started that leadership journey, although I don't know that I articulated it or saw it in that way in the end. So serving as a college president, it's okay, I can do more because I'm not just training the trainings, but we're doing everything with faculty and staff in a way that makes us much more student-centered and student-ready. And that's so critical because we're empowering students and really thinking about their worth and their future and launching them. So something you said triggered that whole thing for me about, good leaders really just start in their backyard. Here's a little tiny problem, but once you start, you become more exposed. It becomes clear that there's a call to do more. The challenge is answering the call and not being overwhelmed by it.
I think a great example of that, since we're just barely still within Black History Month, is if people are familiar with how Dr. King ended up leading as he did. Because it really started as there was this very fundamental problem with people in his congregation not having access to transportation, not feeling like they had dignity in that space. And it grew and grew and grew and grew as he started to see the need and the abilities and the desire for people I can help in this too. I can help in this too. We see that with so many people who end up being really world changers, that it really starts in that connection. A big piece of that then is having a sense of empathy. That you are paying attention to others and feeling a desire to make a difference for them. And sometimes that, in our society right now, there's much less of a sense of, people are so threatened or feel so threatened that it's like, well, I have to take care of me and mine, that there's less room for empathy. And so as both a leader and a psychologist, right, that interaction is really tough.
Yes.
How do we break through those spaces where people are still feeling like they have to protect to start figuring out how do we work together? How do we see other people and not see them as a threat, but as partners?
Yeah. I mean, I wrote about this in my Monday mission moment. I won't go through the Gurney Mills story. I mean, it's a big one for me, always thinking about no one gives birth to a child and wishes the worst. We live in a society and an economy where the mindset is around scarce resources, which is different than collective societies around the world that really focus on group empowerment and taking care of the groups. Even, more lineal patriarchal societies really focus on the benefit and the welfare of the group. So, our extreme individualism has led us to that scarce resources mindset and mentality. And you become really into just more internal and insular and siloed in that protection of self. I'm not critical of the church all of the time, universal, but it is one of those pieces. The way that we teach love is modeled in that sense of individualism without talking about that scarce resources, oppression mentality that goes around it. And I think you're seeing more of that now as we get into, the political era and campaigns, and the church, which is the place where people go for healing, for encouragement, for resilience, is now in ways that are so amazing to me confounded with consumerism and capitalism and that scarce resources mentality. And it really has the fear of that. I mean, I talk a lot about, when I used to do diversity trainings and consultations, I would talk a lot about the common American trait is trauma. But we don't want to talk about that. We had involuntary servants, slaves that came in. We had people who were political and spiritual refugees that came over. We've all had some trauma, and we're re-traumatizing ourselves without even thinking about it. So the church, which is the place that's supposed to help you with that, we had sex scandals and trauma, but we've moved into the era of you're not loving well, you're not loving right. It's the extremes around pro-life versus pro-choice or other things. And so that sense of empathy and the basic sort of, you were a human being whose parents were so excited when you were born and thought you had the world as your opportunity to grow and to thrive and to fulfill. I don't know how we've lost that, but we've got to get back to that.
I will speak about the church, but briefly. I'll try not to monopolize. I got lots of things to say. individualism is a huge part of that, and that spirituality became a commodity. And it was about me feeling good about me. And we lost that sense of us. Parallel to that was a loss of moral authority that came with sex scandals and the growth of prosperity gospel preaching and the leaders who often, sometimes abuse that. Who, it's hard to preach the message of Jesus about helping others and giving, and especially 38 out of 58 of the parables that Jesus taught were about money, and usually not positively, with millionaire leaders. And so people see that and they're like, wait, what is actually going on in that space? And I think there's the traditional spaces where Americans would go to get a sense of moral connection. Like, what is this all about? How do we help each other? How do we see that model? Where do we see a love that extends beyond itself? Have really decayed. And so that's education, and some of that internal, some of that external. The church writ large, some of that internal, some of that external. And politics, right? We used to have leaders that we could look to and say that. I want to be that kind of a person, some of that internal and some of that external. And so where do people go? And this may be where I'm finally stumbling into a question. Where do people go to find models of leaders who are not just about, I'm going to make money and give some back. I'm going to get power and use it to maybe help people. Right? I think we're all searching for that, and it's coming up empty right now. So that's where your values, your beliefs, your faith can be that model for leadership. And so do you have folks where you look out and say, this person I think is doing, inspires you?
That's a good question.
To say, like, that's the kind of leader I would like to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. You were talking, and I was thinking about Michael Curry's book, Love is the Way, which we talk about a lot. Shared with you a lot about that. And really, his writings really made me think differently about leadership. I don't like the phrase servant leader, and I don't know why. I'll be honest about that. There's something about being a servant and being a leader and the humility that's embedded in that I don't think is useful. But Michael Curry challenges us, like, to think about that very question: who are the leaders that we aspire to, and who are the leaders that our young people are seeing now? And is love the way? Is love really about that sense of leadership? So, I think about individuals who I would say probably are more sacrificial in that they're giving, and in that they, I'm going to say, they put down their cross and deny self to make sure that others feel included and belong. And that's the challenge that we have. It's the we will love you unconditionally minus the conditions that, because we're humans, we put on people.
Yeah. And there's still little room for grace when people are human.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
As I remember when people saw Selma when the movie came out, and it was going into like, oh wait, this is also a human. We like we like stained glass Jesus. We like statue king. We like the perfect people, because then it gives us permission to be like, well, I can't do that. And I think when we see flawed, one, there's kind of this like, we're so disappointed somehow that we lose any sense that, like, maybe there's still good stuff in there. And there's so little room for people to still be human and do good stuff. So I think that's part of the wrestling, is our lives become more and more open. Are we still actually living with integrity even when we mess up? So I think that's a big part of it, is, do we still have grace to say, wait, this person is there's always limits on that. There's still accountability. But to also say, like, yeah, I messed up on that. I shouldn't have done it that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a vulnerability in that. You and I had talked about Chosen, the series, which I would highly recommend for anyone who wants to be a leader. And I think when I talked with you about that, and I kept going, I'm becoming addicted to it. Season 4 is out. The one thing that really resonates with me, Jesus displays a vulnerability that's shocking. I think the first couple of episodes, I was like, wait, he was a human, and we're getting like, oh, the people, the disciples, they were humans. And so it's like the backstories and the flesh that you don't really read when you're reading scriptures. But Jesus is so kind. And it is I'm obsessed with it. It's been wonderful for me to think about. He led, but he didn't lead as a leader. He was, but he influenced. And he influenced through being vulnerable and kind. And the kindness that's displayed, when you go back and read the Gospels and you sort of start thinking about what that means, that there's an element of kindness that is necessary in order to empower others. And we live in a society where being kind is deemed as being weak. And we certainly don't necessarily connect leadership with kindness. It's the toughness, the firm, the authoritarian sort of principles. And so that juxtaposition, I think you have to be kind. And you're kind when you love.
So, oh gosh, there's always so much. And I think that kindness, that empathy, and also that empowerment that comes just from helping people figure out who they are. And I think I haven't seen as much of the series, but it's moving away from what we think of as the portrait of Jesus that's captured in John, and also in the imperial Jesus that came out of that, and back into a more synoptic version of Jesus, who is much more with people, as opposed to above people.
In the way, on the way, along the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. When I think one of the great statements for that is the difference between where's the kingdom of God, and in John it's very much like, well, the kingdom of God is this beautiful, wonderful thing that's coming, as opposed to in the synoptics when it's like, well, the kingdom of God is already among you. And what an empowering statement that is for people to understand, like, you already have what God wants this world to be.
Yes.
You already have it. What are you going to do?
And that goes back to vocation.
Right. That goes back to vocation. And that sense of who are you?
And
what is meaning and purpose and value in your life, which I think is something we struggle with. We mentioned it, it was in one of the green paper discussion forums where somebody lifted that up, that like we as a college are looking for that. Students are looking for that. I think our nation is still looking for that, because we have lost that sense of who we are. What does it mean for us to be American? What does it mean for us to be at North Central? What does it mean for Eric to be Eric and for Anita to be Anita? Because that's all we can do ultimately is be who we're made to be.
Right.
Speaking of that, there was one piece I wanted to ask, because I think this leadership style, the attributes you're lifting up of kindness and grace and empathy and listening are often seen as attributes that are more feminine in our society. And you've also talked about, kind of your background and what that meant for how you were raised in the community building with that. How much of you as your identity is reflected in your leadership and your style?
Yeah, okay. 100% of that. It's an insult to me when people say you seem so authentic, because I'm trying to figure out, would I be inauthentic or fake? Like, it's just not a compliment. So this is it. I call myself the goofy president. I used to call myself the goofy provost. Like, that sense of grace and empathy and kindness is really rooted in how I lead. I've done a lot of leadership inventories and really have a good sense of my leadership style. And it is really a very rooted, people-oriented leadership style. Now, there's pros and cons to that. It does lead for manipulation. My values are always in front, and I now recognize when someone is taking a value and a passion area and waiting for the back door to finish the manipulation. I'm much better about that now. But it is interesting for me that's that. And you know, that's a little about why I don't like the servant leadership label, but really see myself as a people-oriented, human resources kind of leader. And I've learned over time that shifting from that is disastrous. I'm going to give a perfect example of a time where I think it worked for me, much to the chagrin of others. So we were having an issue with a particular department when I was provost at St. Kate's, and needed to go over to meet with the department. Our vice president of human resources was coming with me, and there are rules, there are boundaries, there are things that are insubordination, whatever. And so we're walking over to the meeting together, and she stops me on the sidewalk, and she goes, listen, I appreciate you always being empathic and listening to people and bringing people along, but we don't have time for this. We have a serious issue, and I'm going to stop you when I see you going down that road. Not had to do the, okay, I can't not do that. I can't be forceful or whatever it might be that you're wanting me to be. So, you know, like, I don't want to go in this meeting good cop, bad cop, and lose. Like, I'm going to just have to be me. And so we go in, it's a pleasant meeting. I talk and go, you know, I'm this group, I can't even figure out what the issue is. And this is what I'd like to see, and this is great. And she lost it, slammed the table, and said, I knew you were gonna do this. That behavior is insubordinate. We'll never see it again. You'll get a written reprimand, a verbal reprimand. You'll have consequences on it, whatever. Are there any questions? And everyone's face in the room just fell. And they all, you know, turned to me, the empathic person, to sort of go, what happened? Where did we lose it? And go off the rails. And I will tell you that, you know, it was sort of a take a deep breath, figure out how to recover from this, and go, I agree with her. If those behaviors come again, there will have to be some consequences. But I'm so hopeful because I expected something different from this group, and I'm seeing collaboration and whatever, and sort try to pull it back to that. It was interesting because that meeting was talked about across the campus for at least a year, and people would say, remember the time when that mean HR lady came in and yelled? And I would always go, you know, I get where she was coming from, and she needed to say what she needed to be said, what she needed to say, but I needed to do it in my way. And so when I try to do it differently, it fails. Now, the danger of that for me as a leader is that people always expect that leadership, that tough, rigid, harsh, whatever's gonna come. But I'm centered in my faith, where empowering others, fostering resilience, and respecting the worth and dignity of humans is how I'm going to connect. And so there are probably times when I need to be more controlling, harsh, whatever, all the negative words, synonyms of trying to find a positive one. But it's hard for me to do that. And it would disrupt relationships in such a way that it would be harder to come from that. So I really try not to do that. So that sense of grace, that sense of empathy, I think it's why I was attracted to psychology. I think that's why people thought I was a natural. Yes, we'll let you in, you're a great counselor. I think you can lead in that way, but it is terrifying for others who want more. Just tell me what to do. Just give us the vision, just whatever. And so.
And the time and
Yes.
the personal investment it takes.
Yes.
Because people have to figure out why am I here?
Correct.
Instead of you just telling me why I'm here. I have
And
to
the
find
vulnerability that leads to. I mean, that, you know, it's part of I love being on the listening tour and doing the green paper forums and people going, okay. And it's like, I'm going to create, the goal for this institution is to develop students who are curious, engaged, ethical, and purposeful citizens and leaders. We have to do that by being curious, engaged, and ethical and purposeful leaders and influencers of our student. We're going to create an environment for that to happen. And I really see my role as creating the environment for that to happen with And that's a challenge when we're so used to corporate type leaders coming in and going, we're in 2024, I'm here now, here's a strategic plan and the direction, fall in line. And so working through that, I think, is going to be the biggest challenge, especially as leading as president now.
Yeah, and to recognize that the only way an institution in education, and I would say in faith areas in the church, and hopefully our political leaders and other leaders are paying attention, you have to actually do the things that you say are your values. You can't just be teaching the students, oh, these things are important, if they look around and say, well, yeah, but that's not how this is working here, is it? Like, you have to embody those values all the way through. Because if you are inauthentic, just like if you're personally inauthentic, if you are saying one thing and people see that that's not what's happening, you're done.
Yeah.
You are not, you have to walk the talk. That is it.
Yeah.
And we
That's
have a
why
great
we're
model
discouraged.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Michael, everyone must read Michael Curry's book. I'm not getting commission. But the discouragement of our country and our young people in particular comes because they want those boundaries and parameters, but they want to see us failing while we're trying to love. And having love be the goal. I mean, that really is, you take the Gospels, you pull them together, and our charge, our call is to love. And so I'm very cognizant of the discouragement that prevents that. And really, I talked a lot about people being in their turtle shells, flipped over on their back, going, not only do you want me to start walking, you do realize I have to flip over and be vulnerable and put the parts out to get going. It's going to take a lot, but love will help us to be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I want to also thank the folks who are here. We'll get into our question time in just a minute. Thanks for everybody who is watching this online. If you want to support what we do, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, make a comment on this, especially on future topics. We'd love to hear more from folks who are engaged with the Faith and series to how we can serve you and your interests. And so thanks so much for being with us today, and thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.